Most folks, they spend their whole lives looking for a shortcut, a secret door, a hidden path straight to the good life. They hear whispers of a treasure map, a magic bean, a lucky number, and they chase it with a hunger that blinds them to the road right under their feet. They see the flashy success stories, the overnight fortunes, and they think, why not me? Why not now? They forget that the quickest way to the bottom is often the one that promised to take you to the top in a single leap. They forget that the sturdy path, the one built brick by painstaking brick, is the one that actually holds up when the storm hits. There's a quiet wisdom in the steady hand, a hidden strength in the slow climb that all the easy money in the world can never teach you. And sometimes it takes losing everything to learn it. There was a man I'm thinking of who learned that lesson the hard way. His name was Floyd. 48 years old, and he looked every damn day of it, plus a few extra for good measure. Floyd was a construction worker, had been since he was fresh out of high school, watching the steel rise and the concrete set, knowing that every slab and every beam was a testament to somebody's sweat. He wasn't a big man, not in the way some fellas are, all muscle and bluster. Floyd was built lean and tough, like a piece of oak that had weathered 100 winters. His shoulders were wide, sloped slightly from years of carrying heavy loads, and his back, you could tell just by looking at the way he stood, had its own collection of aches and stories. His hands were what really told the tale, though. They were workers' hands, plain and simple. Knuckles thick and scarred, skin like worn leather, the lines on his palms etched deep as riverbeds. You'd see the grime under his fingernails even after a good scrub, a permanent badge of honor from wrestling rebar and smoothing concrete. These weren't hands that knew soft office paper or delicate instruments. These were hands that knew the bite of cold steel and the rasp of rough lumber. His face was a map of his life, too. Lines fanning out from the corners of his eyes, etched deeper when he squinted against the sun or just thought real hard. He kept his hair cut short, practical, a salt and pepper mix that was leaning more salt these days. He wasn't one for fancy barbershops. A quick trim with clippers in the bathroom mirror was about all he bothered with. His jaw was strong, usually set in a quiet, observant way, like he was always taking things in, sizing things up, but not saying much unless he had something worth saying. But it was his eyes that held you. They were a muted blue, sometimes seeming almost gray depending on the light. They weren't bright or flashy, but they held a quiet strength, a kind of deep-set honesty that made you trust him without even knowing why. They'd seen a lot, those eyes. Years of sunrises over half-built structures, years of watching the rain turn a job site into a mud pit, years of looking across a dinner table at a family he loved fiercely. There was a weariness in them sometimes, a shadow that hinted at worries he carried, burdens he didn't often speak about. But underneath that weariness, there was also a steady flicker of something unwavering, like a pilot light that just wouldn't go out. He was the kind of man you'd want on your crew, the one who showed up every day, did his job without complaint, and never left a corner cut. Reliable as the sunrise, steady as the ground he helped lay. But deep down, behind that quiet strength, those steady eyes held a story of a gamble, a fear, and a quiet determination that was only just beginning to truly forge him. Floyd, at 48, lived a life measured in sunrises and sunsets, in the rhythmic thud of a hammer, the whine of a saw, the roar of a concrete mixer. His days began before the birds even thought about chirping. The alarm, a cheap digital clock with glowing red numbers, would scream its metallic protest at 5:00 a.m., sharp and unforgiving. He never hit snooze, never even considered it. Hitting snooze was a luxury for people who didn't have to worry about the rent or the ever-present tuition bill for Sarah's state college. He'd swing his feet to the cool linoleum of his bedroom floor, the sound of his wife, Brenda, breathing softly beside him, a comforting anchor in the pre-dawn quiet. Their small, well-maintained ranch house, nestled in a working-class suburb, was his fortress, even if it felt more like a leaky old boat sometimes, constantly taking on water. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. A bit cluttered, sure, with Brenda's craft projects spilling onto the dining table and Mike's gaming console wires snaking across the living room carpet, but it was cozy. It was home. In the bathroom, the mirror showed him a familiar face. Not handsome, not ugly, just. Lived in, the slight puffiness under his eyes, the network of fine lines around them, the permanent faint scuff of concrete dust that seemed to cling to his pores no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd splash cold water on his face, the shock a tiny jolt to his system, then methodically brush his teeth, shave with an old, reliable safety razor and comb his short, practical hair. Downstairs, the kitchen was his domain for the first hour of the day. He'd brew a pot of strong coffee, the aroma a primal signal that the day had truly begun. While it dripped, he'd pack his lunch. Usually a couple of tuna sandwiches, an apple, maybe a handful of pretzels. Nothing fancy, just fuel. He'd sit at the kitchen table, the silence broken only by the hum of the fridge and the clinking of his spoon against the mug, sipping his coffee, watching the street outside slowly lighten from charcoal gray to a soft, hesitant blue. This was his quiet time, a moment to himself before the world demanded his attention. By 5:45 a.m., he was pulling out of the driveway in his beat-up Ford F-150, the suspension groaning a bit, but the engine, old as it was, still reliable. The drive to the job site was usually a half-hour slog through light traffic, a parade of other working men and women heading to their own early starts. He'd listen to the local talk radio, sometimes a classic rock station, letting the sounds wash over him, his mind already running through the day's tasks. Footings for the new addition, framing out a couple of interior walls, maybe pouring a slab if the weather held. Always something, always the grind. The work itself was honest. Hard on the body, certainly, but honest. He was good at it, too. Knew his way around a blueprint, could read the ground, understood how structures went together, piece by careful piece. He was a foreman now, which meant more responsibility, more headaches, but also a few more dollars in the paycheck. Not enough, though. Never enough. Every month, the bills piled up on the corner of the kitchen counter, a silent, relentless enemy. The mortgage, car payments, utilities, groceries, Mike's braces that seemed to be an endless investment, and then the big one. Sarah's college tuition. Even with a scholarship, it was a mountain, slowly eroding their savings, making it feel like they were constantly swimming upstream, just trying to keep their heads above water. He saw the way Brenda looked at the bank statements, the faint worry lines deepening around her mouth. He saw the little things she gave up for the kids, the new dress she didn't buy, the small comforts she sacrificed without a word. He loved his family fiercely, and that love was both his greatest strength and his deepest vulnerability. It was for them he toiled, for them he worried, for them he had once foolishly gambled. The constant hum of financial insecurity, a low-grade fever that never quite broke, gnawed at him. It was a pressure cooker, slowly building, making him feel like no matter how many hours he put in, no matter how much sweat dripped onto the dusty concrete, he was always just one step behind, always playing catch-up. Deep down, a buried ambition, a younger Floyd's dream, sometimes resurfaced. He once imagined a different life for himself, for them. A life where money wasn't a constant, suffocating weight. He wanted security, true security, not just for today, but for tomorrow, for his kids' futures. He wanted to see Brenda relax, truly relax, without that faint shadow of worry in her eyes. The gap between that youthful dream and the everyday reality was a chasm, wide and deep, and it was in that chasm that the seeds of his past mistakes had taken root. He knew with a certainty that sometimes felt like a physical ache, that he was capable of more, that they deserved more. But how to bridge that chasm? How to make that leap without losing everything in the fall? The question hung over him unspoken, a constant companion in the quiet moments of his day. The question hung over him unspoken, a constant companion in the quiet moments of his day. Every morning the answer seemed no closer. The 5 a.m. alarm was a brutal, familiar jolt, a cold hand shaking him awake from whatever fragile peace sleep had managed to offer. Before the sun even thought about stretching its rays across the suburban rooftops, Floyd was already on his feet. The ritual was ingrained. A quick splash of cold water on his face, the silent, methodical movements of making coffee, strong, black, enough to cut through the lingering fog of exhaustion. He'd sit at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the weak glow of the range hood, listening to the house creak around him, a silent sentry while the rest of his family slept. He'd check the weather app on his old phone, grimace at the predicted low temperatures, and then meticulously pack his lunch. A sandwich, an apple, a thermos of the bitter coffee. Out the door, the air was often still crisp, sometimes biting, carrying the faint scent of diesel from early morning deliveries. His old pickup, dependable but perpetually needing some small repair, rumbled to life. The drive to the site was a blur of half-empty roads, the sky slowly lightening from deep indigo to a bruised purple. Then the site itself, a skeletal frame of steel and concrete, a symphony of hammers, drills, and distant heavy machinery already at work. He'd pull on his gloves, grab his tools, and for the next 10, 12 hours he'd become part of that symphony, his body moving with the practiced grace of a man who'd spent decades shaping the world with his hands. Each nail driven, each beam set, each brick laid was a testament to his strength, his precision, his sheer will. But even as his muscles burned, his mind was rarely quiet. It was a ledger in his head, always balancing, always calculating. Sarah's college tuition was due again in 2 months, a looming mountain range on his financial horizon. Mike needed new cleats, growing boy. Brenda's car had that weird, rattling sound again. The mortgage payment, the utility bills, the grocery list that seemed to grow longer even as the prices climbed higher. He'd replay conversations with Brenda, the subtle ways she'd try to stretch $1, the quiet dignity with which she managed their tight budget. It was a constant reminder of how thin the ice was beneath their feet, how one unexpected expense could send them all crashing through. Sometimes, in the brief lull between tasks, or in the deafening roar of a concrete mixer, he'd find himself staring out at the half-built structure, at the vastness of the city spreading out beyond it. He'd see the gleaming towers, the symbols of other people's success, other people's fortunes. And a flicker of that younger Floyd would surface. The one who believed in the big score, the one who dreamt of a life beyond this relentless physical grind. He'd remember the exhilarating rush of hope, the almost feverish conviction that this time it would work, that this one investment would be the key. Then, just as quickly, the chill would set in. A cold, hard knot in his gut, a phantom pain from a wound that had never truly healed. The memory of the sure thing that wasn't, the one that had snatched their savings, left them teetering on the edge of losing everything. That fear, raw and suffocating, was a shadow that clung to him, even years later. It was why he held back, why he double-checked every receipt, why every extra hour of overtime felt like a necessary penance. He was still the man who wanted more for his family, but now that desire was caged by a terror of repeating the past. He was reliable, honest, yes. But he was also paralyzed by caution, a ship moored too tightly to the dock, afraid to set sail even into a calm sea, convinced a storm lurked just beyond the horizon. The chasm between his dreams and his reality still stretched, but now instead of looking for a bridge, he mostly just stood at its edge, terrified of falling. The question of how to cross it had been replaced by a quiet, gnawing dread of what if he tried, and failed, again, and failed, again. But even a ship moored tightly can still be caught in a rogue wave. For Floyd, that wave wasn't a sudden, crashing storm, but a slow, insidious leak that swallowed everything he had. It started with an email, innocent enough, buried in his spam folder at first. Important update regarding your investment with Future Wealth Innovations. Future Wealth was the startup, the sure thing he'd poured their last reserves into against Brenda's quiet, worried glances. The one that had promised to revolutionize microlending, the one where the founder had such a slick pitch, such an earnest smile, such a solid-looking spreadsheet. Floyd had seen the numbers, believed the hype, felt that old, familiar tickle of excitement, the one that whispered this time, "This is it." He clicked the link. His stomach tightened before he even read the first line. The wording was soft, corporate speak designed to cushion a blow that would shatter lives. Unforeseen market volatility, regulatory challenges, strategic restructuring, difficult decision to cease operations. The words blurred. He scrolled frantically to the bottom, to the bolded paragraph. We regret to inform you that due to these circumstances, all invested capital has been fully depleted. There will be no returns distributed. No returns distributed. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. He read it again, slowly this time, each word a hammer blow. Fully depleted. Every penny. His hands started to tremble, a fine tremor that spread up his arms. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Brenda was due home in an hour. Sarah would be calling about her college tuition payment. Mike wanted a new pair of cleats. And he, Floyd, had taken their security, their future, their home, because the house was leveraged against what he'd sunk into this innovation, and he'd thrown it all into a black hole. He stood there, phone in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in his unseeing eyes, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the suffocating quiet of the kitchen. He could feel the familiar weight of his work boots on the linoleum, the phantom ache in his lower back from a day of lifting beams, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered but those words, fully depleted. The world tilted on its axis, not violently, but with a slow, sickening lurch. He thought of Brenda, her tired but trusting face. He thought of Sarah, so bright, so eager for her future. Mike, still a boy, looking up to his dad. And he had failed them spectacularly, irrevocably. He had gone back to the well of reckless hope, and this time he hadn't just come up dry, he'd poisoned the whole damn aquifer. He was frozen, a statue of dread, waiting for the floor to open up beneath him. The night arrived like a thick, dark blanket, heavy and suffocating. It was 3 a.m., and Floyd lay rigidly on his side of the bed, staring at the barely visible ceiling, trying to control the frantic drumbeat of his heart. Brenda was asleep beside him, her breathing soft and even oblivious to the silent earthquake that had ripped through their lives just hours before. He couldn't bring himself to tell her, not yet. The words felt too big, too catastrophic to utter into the peaceful dark. His mind was a vicious loop. How could you be so stupid, Floyd? Again, the bitter taste of self-reproach coated his tongue. He saw the faces of the slick founder, heard the promises, the jargon, the assurances. He saw his own greedy reflection, the hopeful fool who always thought he was smarter than the market, immune to the pitfalls that swallowed others. He told himself he was different this time, that he'd done his research, that he understood the risks. Lies. All lies, he'd told himself, to justify the thrill of the gamble. The terror was a cold, sharp blade twisting in his gut. Their small ranch house, the one he'd scraped and saved for, the one he'd patched and painted and poured his sweat into. It was on the line. Sarah's college, the dreams of a better life for her. Mike's future, the simple things like new shoes, a decent education, not having to worry about where the next meal came from. He'd stripped it all bare. He was responsible for this family, for their security, and he had gambled it away. He felt the hot sting of tears behind his eyes, but he wouldn't let them fall. Not now. Not when Brenda was sleeping. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the harsh realities, but they pressed in, vivid and unforgiving. He saw the eviction notice on the door, Brenda's face crumbling, Sarah's bewildered hurt, Mike's quiet disappointment. He saw himself, a broken man, stripped of dignity, having to tell his family he'd lost everything. The fear wasn't just for himself. It was for the pain he knew he'd inflicted on the people he loved most. He was a fraud, a failure, a reckless idiot who had nearly destroyed everything he had worked for. The cold, suffocating weight of utter destitution pressed down on him, and in that dark, lonely hour he felt truly, hopelessly lost. His gut knew even before he checked the numbers. A sick certainty had settled in his bones days ago, growing colder, heavier. Still, a fool's hope clung to him, a desperate whisper that maybe, just maybe, the news he'd been avoiding for 48 hours wouldn't be as bad as he feared. He slid out of bed, careful not to disturb Brenda. Floorboards creaked under his weight, each groan a judgment echoing his failure. Past Sarah's and Mike's closed doors he walked, their trusting sleep a heavy reminder of the chasm he had dug for them. No lights, just the pale blue glow of the microwave clock. 3:17 a.m. The hour of ghosts and regrets. His hands shook fumbling for the coffee pot, pouring black, no sugar. The clatter of ceramic against ceramic, a jarring intrusion. Just the bitter truth. Mug clutched tight, he slipped into the small home office. The chair squeaked a protest as he sat, mirroring his own internal groan. He stared at the screen, the cursor blinking patiently, accusingly. The investment portal, the gateway to his recent downfall, mocked him with its slick interface and promises of grandeur. His finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. He knew, he'd known, but seeing it in black and white felt like being punched in the gut all over again. He clicked. The page loaded. A pit opened in his stomach. The numbers were clear, stark, merciless. The exponential returns had become exponential losses. Every penny, every last hope he'd poured into that startup, gone, wiped out. The life savings, the college fund contributions, the emergency buffer, all vaporized. The mortgage payment due in 2 weeks suddenly felt like a mountain he had no legs to climb. A quiet gasp escaped him, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. It was a dying breath of a dream. He leaned back, the chair protesting again, louder this time. His eyes traced the familiar cracks in the office ceiling, each one a testament to years of deferred maintenance, of putting money into opportunities instead of what was right in front of him. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The coffee, usually a comfort, tasted like ash. This wasn't just a loss, it was a betrayal. A betrayal of Brenda, of Sarah, of Mike. Of himself. He had promised them security, and instead he'd gambled it all away on a whispered hope and a slick presentation. The shame burned hotter than the fear. He had been so stupid, so arrogant, so desperate to believe in the magic beanstalk when he should have been tending the garden. Enough, he whispered, the word barely audible, lost in the pre-dawn silence. It wasn't an angry shout, not a dramatic declaration. It was a hollow, defeated sound that nonetheless held the weight of a lifetime of quiet desperation. Enough of the chasing, the hoping for the big score. Enough of the sleepless nights, the anxious glances at the phone, the pit in his stomach that told him this wasn't right. Enough of believing there was a shortcut to something built on years of honest sweat. He closed his eyes, picturing the stack of bricks on the job site, each one heavy, solid, laid with purpose. Building something real, something that would stand. That was the way. The only way, not the lottery ticket, not the roll of the dice. Just one brick, then another, then another. When he opened his eyes again, the room was still dark, but something inside him had shifted. The fear hadn't vanished, no. It was still a cold knot in his gut. But beneath it, a tiny ember of resolve had sparked. He wouldn't find a new gamble. He would stop gambling entirely. He would stop chasing the dream of getting rich quick and start building something truly lasting, even if it took him the rest of his life. The first step was always the hardest. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't exciting. It was mundane, tedious, and utterly unspectacular. And it had to happen right now before the sun came up and the world demanded he put on his usual mask. He pushed away from the computer, its glowing screen a symbol of his downfall. Instead, he pulled out a yellow legal pad and a dull pencil. No fancy software, no high-tech solutions, just raw numbers laid bare. He wrote DEBTS at the top of the page. Underneath, he listed the mortgage, the car payments, the credit card balances, every single outgoing penny, every burden. It was a brutal inventory, a public shaming of his financial irresponsibility. Each line item was a fresh stab of regret. He kept going, though his hand cramped and his mind screamed for him to stop, to go back to bed and pretend. Then, income. His construction wages, Brenda's part-time earnings. It was a paltry sum compared to the mountain of debt. The gap between the two felt like an abyss. For years, he'd just managed, shuffling money around, always convinced the next big payout was coming. Now there was no more shuffling, just the stark reality. He spent the next few hours dissecting every expense. Groceries, utilities, gas, insurance, even the occasional takeout. Nothing was too small. He questioned every single dollar, asking, is this absolutely necessary? Could it be cheaper? He knew this was going to mean sacrifices, painful ones. No more impulse buys. No more treats for the kids just because he felt guilty. No more wishing, just doing. The sun began to peek through the blinds, casting a weak, dusty light across the room. He felt exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from the sheer mental and emotional toll of confronting his wreckage. He wanted to give up, to crumple the paper and pretend none of it had happened. Urge to find another opportunity, a smaller, safer one, just to get back on his feet, was a persistent itch. His old habits were a siren song, tempting him with the promise of speed. But then he remembered the fear, the cold, suffocating terror of losing everything. He remembered Brenda's face, Sarah's dreams, Mike's future. He thought of the bricks one by one, slow, steady, unyielding. He took a deep breath. His hand, still trembling, wrote SAVINGS. At the bottom of the page, followed by a 0. It was a harsh truth, but it was his truth now. And from this 0 he would build, not with a gamble, but with a plan. He'd start with $5, then 10, then 50. Each penny a tiny brick laid carefully, deliberately. It wasn't exciting, not heroic. It was just work. Hard, grinding, quiet work. But this time it was work that would build something real, something that wouldn't crumble into dust with the next market fluctuation. This time it would last. This time it was for good. The first few days were like walking through quicksand. Every single expense, every little habit felt like a fight. Floyd started packing his lunch for work, a simple sandwich and an apple, instead of grabbing a hot dog from the truck that pulled up to the site. The guys ribbed him a little, asked if Brenda was on a diet or if he was suddenly worried about his figure. He'd just grunt, a non-committal shrug, and take another bite of his plain bologna. Inside, he felt a small, dull ache. It wasn't just the food, it was the easy camaraderie, the brief escape from the grind that a shared, bought lunch offered. Now, even that small pleasure was a sacrifice. He started driving the speed limit, sometimes even a little under, to save on gas. He stopped by the local library to check out books instead of buying a new paperback at the convenience store. He felt the phantom weight of those pennies, turning them over in his mind, adding them to the growing, microscopic pile he was trying to build. He knew it was ridiculous, almost pathetic, to count dimes and nickels when his hole was so vast. His old self, the one who'd chased big scores, sneered at this snail's pace. "What's $5 gonna do, Floyd?" 10. "You'll be dead before you make a dent." The voice was a familiar serpent, coiling around his resolve, whispering doubts. By the end of the first week, the novelty had worn thin, replaced by a deep, weary boredom. The constant mental calculations, the deliberate denials, began to chafe. He saw a new tool at the hardware store, a fancy laser level that would save him time on the job. His old habit would have been to rationalize it as an investment, a necessary upgrade. He stood there, his hand reaching out, feeling the smooth, cold plastic. His mind already conjured the ease it would bring, the small thrill of a new gadget. Then the cold dread. He saw the numbers, not the price tag on the tool, but the shrinking balance in their bank account, the mortgage statement with its unforgiving demands. He pulled his hand back as if burned. The tool in his mind wasn't a convenience. It was a brick stolen from his family's foundation. He walked out of the store empty-handed, the phantom weight of the tool replaced by the heavier weight of his commitment. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow, grinding battle against impulse and habit. One Saturday, Mike, his son, asked if they could go to the new amusement park that had opened up an hour away. "All the guys are going, Dad. It'd be awesome." Floyd's heart ached. He remembered a time not so long ago when he would have said yes without a second thought, maybe even borrowed a few bucks if he was short. He saw Mike's eager face, the hope in his eyes, and felt the familiar sting of guilt, a sharp needle in his chest. Brenda, sensing his internal struggle, put a hand on his arm. "Maybe another time, honey. We could do something closer to home, have a picnic at the park." He looked at Brenda, then at Mike, who, though disappointed, nodded, understanding more than Floyd gave him credit for. The boy had seen enough of his dad's big ideas go south. Floyd swallowed hard. "Yeah, Mike, your mom's right. Let's do a picnic. My treat, we'll make it a good one." He managed a smile, but it felt thin, stretched. Later, he found himself staring at the wall, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He felt like a failure, not because he was saying no, but because he had to say no. This wasn't the life he wanted for them. This wasn't the freedom he'd promised. Was this really going to work? Was this endless deprivation the price of security? The idea of giving up, of just throwing caution to the wind and trying one more sure thing, pulsed in his mind like a persistent migraine. He was tired, so terribly tired of fighting. He almost broke. Almost. There was an old buddy, a good guy but a bit of a schemer, who called him up, bubbling with enthusiasm about a can't-miss opportunity. "Floyd, my man, I got something real for you this time. Penny stock gonna explode. We're talking 10-bagger easy. Get in now or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The words, once so seductive, now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. But still a part of him, a deeply ingrained part that craved the thrill of the chase, yearned to listen. He could hear the ringing of the jackpot, the sweet sound of redemption. Just a small sum, he reasoned, just enough to get back some dignity. He didn't have much to lose, really, not anymore. He found himself pulling out his old contact list, the names of the brokers he'd used, the websites he'd frequented. His finger hovered over the phone icon, a tremor running through his hand. He could almost feel the rush, the dopamine hit of the gamble. But then a colder, stronger memory asserted itself. The night he'd found Brenda crying silently in the kitchen. The terror in his gut when he realized the house was on the line. The hollow ache of his children's hopeful faces. The bricks. He saw them vividly in his mind's eye, tiny, insignificant, but real. Each dollar saved, each unnecessary purchase foregone was a brick. And he remembered the bitter taste of crumbling dust, of everything he'd tried to build with shortcuts turning to nothing. The phantom weight of that lost fortune, the sheer stupidity of chasing a dream built on air, pulled him back. He put the phone down, his hand shaking. The struggle was constant, a quiet war waged inside his own head every single day. But he was still standing. He was still laying bricks. Months went by. It was like watching paint dry. You don't see it happen until the whole house is a different color. Floyd's war inside didn't disappear overnight. Days still came when news flashed an overnight millionaire or a buddy boasted a big score and the old itch came back. That whisper of, "What if?" would snake through his thoughts, trying to pry open the walls he was building. But now he had defenses. He had the memory of Brenda's quiet tears. He had the image of crumbling dust. And he had the bricks. He started small. A few bucks from lunch, 20 from skipping Friday's beer, no lottery tickets. These were his first bricks, hidden in an old shoe box. Then a small work bonus, an unexpected 100. Old Floyd would see it as seed money. New Floyd, after a reflexive pause, saw 10 more solid bricks. He deposited it into his modest savings, an account once embarrassing. Now it was about the act, not the amount. The change was so gradual, like the erosion of a riverbank, that even Floyd barely noticed it at first. But a subtle peace began to settle over him. The gnawing anxiety that used to be a constant hum under his skin started to quiet. He wasn't obsessing over get-rich-quick schemes anymore. Instead, his focus narrowed, sharpened. He started seeing opportunities not for a sudden windfall, but for steady, incremental gains. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom himself, saving a plumber's call. That was 2 bricks. He sold an old power tool he hadn't used in years on an online marketplace, earning $100. 10 more bricks. Brenda, always the sharp one, noticed it first. She saw him not just coming home tired, but coming home quieter, not a sullen quiet, but a thoughtful one. "You're different, Floyd," she said one evening, watching him sort through old bills, not with a sigh, but with a focused frown. "Less frantic," he grunted, tracing a line on a spreadsheet he'd cobbled together in an old notebook. "Just trying to get things straight, hun." But it was more than that. He was building. Each brick laid, no matter how small, brought a quiet satisfaction. The initial despair, the fear that had been a cold knot in his stomach, began to loosen. It wasn't gone entirely, not yet, but it was receding, replaced by a growing, solid sense of purpose. He wasn't just working for the weekend anymore. He was working for a future he was actively, painstakingly creating. Hope wasn't a lottery ticket held aloft. It was the steady thud of a hammer, brick after brick. Months turned into a year, then two. Floyd was still Floyd, the same sturdy man with the calloused hands and the quiet way. But the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep-set calm. He still woke before dawn, still smelled of sawdust and sweat at the end of the day. But his conversations around the dinner table weren't punctuated by stressed silences or hurried excuses about bills. He'd listen more, really listen, when Sarah talked about her college classes or Mike rambled about his high school baseball team. He was present. His old shoebox was long retired. Now there was a dedicated savings account that grew with a quiet dignity. Not fast, not flashy, but undeniably steadily. He tracked it not daily with a desperate hope, but weekly with a methodical satisfaction. He learned about compound interest, a concept that would have bored old Floyd senseless. Now he saw it as a silent, tireless worker, stacking bricks alongside him, multiplying his efforts. One evening, Mike came home from school, grumbling about a classmate whose dad had just bought a brand-new, souped-up truck. "Man, his dad must be loaded, Pop. I wish we had stuff like that." Floyd put down his newspaper. He didn't sigh, didn't snap. He just looked at his son, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Son, your buddy's dad might have hit a streak, or maybe he's just good at making it look easy. But easy ain't always what it seems." He paused, thinking. "See that old oak tree out back? Looks strong, doesn't it? Took decades to get that way. Not one big rainstorm, not one sunny day, but every single day, year after year, just growing a little bit, deepening its roots." He leaned forward, his voice low, steady. "Money's a lot like that tree, or like building a good, strong house. You want to get rich? Don't look for a jackpot. That's how you go broke. That's a house built on sand, liable to get washed away. You build it piece by piece, steady and slow. No shortcuts. Just hard work, smart choices, and letting time do its job. It ain't flashy, son, not like those big overnight scores they talk about on the news. It's deliberate. Every extra hour you work, every dollar you save instead of blowing, every bill you pay on time so you don't owe extra interest. Those are bricks, Mike. You stack them up, one on top of the other. Doesn't look like much day to day, but you keep at it, and one day you turn around and you got a fortress." He paused, looking out the window at the setting sun, then back at his son. "And that fortress, that's what gives you peace. That's what lets your sister go to college without drowning in debt. That's what lets your mom and me sleep easy at night. Not some pipe dream, but something real. Something you built with your own two hands, your own discipline." The memory of the collapsed startup, the cold fear, still lingered, but it was no longer a fresh wound. It was a scar, a stark reminder of the lesson learned. He hadn't built a fortune overnight. He hadn't even found a magic formula. What he had done was far simpler and infinitely more powerful. He had learned to value the small, consistent effort. He had learned to trust the process, not the promise. And so there was a man named Floyd who once gambled away his peace chasing a lightning strike. He almost lost everything, but in that barren field of ruin, he learned